Joining me now is a very special guest, our friend Annie Cyrus, and broadcast partner Annie Cyrus helped me set this up. Dr. Arya Pengarlu. Okay, I hope I did that right. Dr. Arya is how I'm going to refer to him. Beautiful last name, though. He's a physicist. This is a highly educated man. He's a physicist, and he's associate professor of clinical neurobiology at Columbia University. Remember me showing you, along with Annie, Annie's the one that showed it to me, the Phoenix Project of Iran, empowering Iran's future, the people side of the first 100-day plan towards a new Iran. Well, the Dr. Arya was involved in this as well, I'm told. He joins us now. Dr. Arya, welcome to the broadcast. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you. It was a pleasure to be with Annie, and I'm glad that you're paying attention to this very important issue.
Oh, we've been paying attention to this important issue for many years. I lived in the Washington, D.C. area, moved there. My father was with the government when I was about 12 years old, moved out of there when I was about 12 years old, lived there from the time I was 4 to about 12. So we were living there during the 1979 Iranian hostage crisis. And I began to follow that even as a young person and became very interested in Iran. I had a little Iranian gal that was in my Christian school when I was in probably about second grade or so, and maybe fifth grade. I'd have to go back and do the math on it. But she was in my elementary class. I believe her name was Miriam. I haven't thought about Miriam until recently. I came across a photo of my class picture, and there she is in it. She was from Iran. I think she had been adopted by a family here living in the U.S. And I remember my parents saying to me, if anyone picks on that little girl, you need to stand up for her, because there are many people in Iran, in Persia, that are not for what's happening, and they're caught in this. And if anyone is misjudging the news and the media and putting this on all of the Iranians and the Persians, then you need to stand up for that little girl. And I remember that. And I remember her name after all these years. So this has been a story, of course, I've been personally involved in to some level, even as a child. You want to start out there? Let's start there. Your story, and your connection to Iran, and let our folks know about you.
Well, your parents telling you that many Iranians are not for that Islamic revolution was an understatement. A vast majority of Iranian people were opposed to it. And the Iran that I grew up in was a staunch ally of the United States. We were very close to the United States. We actually were the biggest footprint that America had militarily, economically, politically in the Middle East. And we used to really keep the peace in the Middle East. I remember that in the last visit of an American president to Iran during the Shah in 1977, President Carter came to Iran in the New Year's Eve of 1977. And while he was raising his glass with the king, he referred to Iran as the island of stability. And it was an island of stability, and not only an island of stability, but island of progress. In the last 15 years of the Shah's government in Iran, we had a double-digit economic growth. We were the China of today, and as far as the peaceful relationship with the neighbors and with the rest of the world was concerned, we were one of the first countries in the world that we recognized Israel's right to exist and Israel's independence after it declared independence in 1948. And throughout 1948 to 1979, when the revolution overthrew the Pahlavi government, we had very close relationship with Israel. I think Tehran was the only capital in the Middle East where Israel had an embassy. I was a student in Aryamer University, the premier university of science and technology in Iran. And at the time, I had a lot of friends. For my pastime, I used to go to American embassy, to American clubs, to various functions with my American friends in Iran and with friends from other countries. Iran was a premier tourist destination for a lot of Europeans. We established the Iran Air, established its first transcontinental flight direct from Tehran to New York. It was the first 10,000 kilometer direct non-stop trip by Pan Am and TWA, the major American airlines at the time. And the relationship was, the strongest, something comparable to today's relationship between the United States and Israel. And suddenly there was the Islamic Revolution. I mean, maybe in some future programs we are going to deal with the causes of the Islamic Revolution, but that's something that happened. And Ayatollah Khomeini came to Iran. He was actually in exile in Iraq, in Saddam Hussein's Iraq, for 15 years. And somehow, mysteriously, 6 months before the February of 1979, when the Shah's government fell, he flew to Paris, and he was well received by the French government. He was provided with all kinds of security and protection and media access. He had an amazing media access, basically his own shortwave radio channel directly beamed into Iran, and he really incited unrest and revolution, which ultimately, within 6 months, resulted in the overthrow of the Pahlavi government. And after the Islamic Republic was established in Iran in February of 1979, the Middle East had never seen a day of peace. Basically, everything that Iran worked for in the prior half a century, that the Pahlavi dynasty ruled in Iran, the Islamists, within a very short time, within probably a year or two, they unraveled all of that. Soon they started fighting with neighbors. The Iran-Iraq war started in 1980, and it lasted 8 years. A million people, almost 500,000 from either side, were perished in that useless and futile war. And during that time, the Islamic regime in Iran used the time and actually abused the time and took advantage of the patriotic time that any country that's at war will experience to crush all the dissent and all their opponents, all the opposition. And after the war ended in 1988, since 1988 till today, this government has been busy basically putting the entire Middle East in fire. They built a lot of proxies like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, in occupied territories, in Yemen, Houthis in Yemen, a number of terrorist organizations and terrorist groups in Syria and in Iraq. And for 20 years, they fought the United States from establishing democracy in Iraq. And they were very successful in really preventing democracy from flourishing in the Middle East. And now we are here. For the last 20 years, Iranian people have been trying hard, demonstrations after demonstrations. I'm not talking about small demonstrations. These are nationwide, million-strong demonstrations in the major cities in Iran, and the government has been brutally putting them down, the last of which was 3 weeks ago, which during the 8th and 9th of January, 2 weeks ago, the Iranian government basically mowed down the Iranian demonstrators across the country in something like 937 cities. And the numbers are different because the government has really turned off all the access to Iran, a digital blackout. They've been subjected the country to a digital blackout, turned off telephones, cell phones, even landline phones have been cut off, and the internet. And as a result, we don't know exactly how many people were killed in those demonstrations, but the numbers that are slowly trickling out are telling us horrible stories. The last number is 43,000 people have been massacred across the country, 350,000 have been injured, and something like 15,000 people have been blinded by directly shooting BB guns at the people's eyes and faces. So the atrocities that the Islamic regime has been committing in Iran in the last 47 years, I think, are materials of storybooks and horror movies. And I'm sure that someday when this government falls, this regime falls, there are many, many, heart-wrenching stories that will come out of Iran, and the whole world will know the true nature of this horrible, horrible regime.
We reported on our news tonight. We've shown, by the way, the pictures of, young kids shot close range by shotguns, pellets. In fact, here is the video we showed earlier last week of a young boy. We showed the actual video of him, his legs. I mean, it's just horrific, horrific. Now we're getting reports, maybe 30,000, 36,000 dead, going into hospitals, killing people in the hospitals. President Trump tweeted out help was on the way, and many thought something was happening imminently. We now know that the USS Abraham Lincoln is in the region and other forces. We have a reporter on the ground in Israel, Aaron Lavarco, a reporter on the ground in Israel, texted me today stating that they're kind of getting indications something may be coming very quick. Do you have any indication that the Trump administration is about to do something, or Israel, or maybe both? Any indication?
I think that the Trump administration is going to do something spectacular. I think they have played with Trump the way they did with Obama and Biden over the course of that negotiation that President Obama had with the Iranian regime, the so-called JCPOA or nuclear agreement. They stretched those negotiations for 2 years, and eventually they convinced President Obama to agree to that horrible agreement, a JCPOA, in which they allowed the Iranian regime to basically keep their nuclear technology, nuclear enrichment technology, only to put a pause on it for a period of 10 years, after which they were entitled to enrich uranium and basically do whatever they wanted. But of course, when President Trump came to office in his first term, he immediately pulled the United States out of that agreement. And as a result, because America was the biggest weight and the biggest government in that agreement, along with 3 European countries of France, Germany, and the UK, along with China and Russia. After President Trump pulled out of that agreement in 2018, the agreement basically fell apart, and U.S. immediately applied sanctions and reinstated all the sanctions that were in place prior to that agreement. And since 2018, President Biden grudgingly agreed with keeping President Trump's sanctions in place. But nevertheless, he kind of looked the other way when Iranian regime shipped millions of barrels of oil to China in direct violation of the terms of those sanctions. And because of that, during Biden administration, the Iranian regime could really survive, at least economically, because President Biden allowed them to sell anywhere from 1.5 million to 2 million barrels of oil per day. And that was enough for the regime to basically fund its suppression forces and its proxies across the Middle East. But after the second term, almost a year ago, a few days more than a year ago, when President Trump came to office, he immediately applied what he called the maximum pressure on the Iranian regime, on the Islamic regime in Iran. And that policy of maximum pressure has been extremely effective in drying up all the resources, at least all the currency, all the hard currency of this regime, which it primarily uses for funding its proxies and putting the entire Middle East to fire, pursuing construction of the weapons of mass destruction through the development of the technology of nuclear enrichment and long-range missiles. Very little of Iranians' money is used for economic development, for projects to promote Iran, and for whether economic development, human development, environmental, or anything for that matter. Iran has one of the oldest fleet of airlines in the world. Some of the airliners that are flying some of the planes in Iran are the planes that we acquired prior to revolution, which means they're anywhere from 40 to 50 years old. These are disasters to happen. But nevertheless, because this regime is subject to all kinds of sanctions. One of those sanctions are dual-use sanctions against technology that can be used in military as well as civilian technology. So airplane manufacturers use some of the most advanced technologies. And since some of the components of those airplanes can be used in development of missiles and anti-air defense systems and so on and so forth. So the United States, Europeans, and any country that uses more than 10% of American technology in their planes, like Brazil and Canada, they're not allowed to sell planes to Iran. And as a result, Iran has one of the most dangerous airlines in the world. And poor people have to use these airlines, and these airlines are disasters that happen. The Iranian planes fall out of the sky on a yearly basis. Iran has more airline disasters than any other country in the history of airline. And that's just one consequence of all these sanctions, which are directly due to the misbehavior and and policies of the supreme leader of the Iranian regime. So this is a regime that is on its last leg. I think the policies of President Trump has been right on the money. He's been really applying maximum pressure. Eventually, the Europeans, right before the sunset of that nuclear agreement, which was supposed to expire on October 18th of 2025, Europeans took the case to the Security Council of the United Nations and declared Islamic Republic in violation of the terms of the nuclear agreement, and they reinstated all the sanctions which were stopped as a result of the JCPOA agreement. And reinstatement of those sanctions in September of 2015 was so devastating that within 3 months, from September to December, Iranian currency lost half of its value. And the situation became so bad that the merchants in Bazaar couldn't do business anymore, because the drop of rial, the Iranian currency, against dollar was so rapid that merchants didn't know what to do. They import commodities from the outside. They pay by dollar. By the time the commodities arrive and they want to sell it, the dollar has increased by a factor of 2. So they couldn't benefit from their transactions with the outside world, and all of the transactions, all of the import exports was with the outside world. So basically, that brought the economy to a complete halt, and then the demonstrations began. In late December, and within a week, the demonstration was brutally put down. And the numbers that you just quoted and the picture that you just showed is a consequence of that massive demonstration and the brutal put down by the Islamic regime.
Do you believe if President Trump strikes Iran, do you believe he'll go after their leadership? Is that going to be the goal, to decapitate the leadership? And are you concerned, as I am, that the administration has been sold lies about MEK, NCRI, whatever you want to call them nowadays? We have, I don't know if you know, we had a guy named Ray who lives in Germany who was a child warrior for MEK. He was with them for 18 years, started out as a kid and became an adult. Through that, we have now built relationships, and we told Annie about it. She watched the interview. She speaks Farsi, so she was able to go and speak with many of these former MEK fighters that are now anti-MEK. She's been able to speak with them, with Ray, introducing her, because they speak in Farsi. I can't even communicate with them. We are going to be interviewing many of them, but we did an extensive broadcast with Ray, speaking English, of course, and he told us about all the atrocities of MEK. He actually said MEK would be worse than the regime they have now, and he explained why. Are you concerned? Because I know there are some folks in the MAGA world. I've interviewed Mayor Rudy Giuliani many times, and I agree with him on many issues, but I don't agree with him on MEK. We had on a former CIA operations officer the other night, and I hosted a debate between her and Annie Cyrus. She's pro-MEK. She supports that they could go back in the region and work well. And I have other people I respect on a lot of issues that, make issue with the Prince Pahlavi and think MEK is great. And I don't understand why they believe that, because a little bit of study shows this is not a good regime. I mean, that's not a good group. And I don't know why people are believing they have all this support on the ground in Iran, because I'm being told by the former MEK people, they have zero support on the ground. Prince Pahlavi has a ton of organic support on the ground. So are you concerned that some close to President Trump have maybe not told him the truth about MEK? And I've been saying for months, President Trump needs to bring Prince Pahlavi into the White House, let him sit in the yellow chairs in front of the fireplace in the Oval Office, and send a message to the Iranian people. Now, that was before 36,000 of them were slaughtered in the street. That never happened, unfortunately. I know it's a long question, but are you concerned that the Trump administration would go with some NCRI/MEK people?
Well, MEK has some powerful lobbies in Washington, D.C., but very little grassroots support in Iran. Actually, what you just said about MEK, that the Iranian regime is the most hated regime on earth, at least in Iran. But if it can be conceivable to you, MEK is more hated than the Iranian regime is, because they started from being a terrorist organization, and their call to fame in Iran before the revolution was assassinating Americans. They called American mercenaries. I mean, American military attaches, an officer of American military that the MEK assassinated in Iran prior to the revolution, and a number of other businessmen, American businessmen that they assassinated. They were a terrorist organization, very similar in the same line of work as Hezbollah and Hamas is today. And they were one of the biggest supporters of Ayatollah Khomeini when Khomeini came to Iran. When Khomeini was brought to Iran from France, MEK provided the security services for the Ayatollah, because Ayatollah didn't really have any military support in Iran. And for almost a year, they were the private army of Ayatollah Khomeini. They participated in assassination and execution of some of the Iranian former officials of the Shah's government. And then somehow they fell out of grace with Ayatollah, and Ayatollah arrested a large number of them. We don't know exactly how many, but thousands of MEK members were assassinated in demonstrations, and then arrested and put on trial and executed in prisons. And then eventually MEK fled to Iraq. And then during the war with Iraq, MEK sided with Saddam Hussein and invaded some of the border cities in Iran, and committed a lot of atrocities, killed a lot of Iranian people during those treacherous wars, siding with Saddam regime, especially during the time that Saddam was doing using chemical weapon to not only to attack Iranian people during the war, but also his own people, the dissidents within his own provinces in Iraq. And MEK was one of the few forces, one of the few political organizations in the world that supported Saddam Hussein throughout its war. They stayed in Saddam. Saddam provided them with finance and military hardware, and gave them camps and all the resources they needed to operate from Iraq across the border from Iran. And eventually, when America invaded Iraq and occupied the entire Iraq, they transferred MEK from Iraq to Albania. And they've been in Albania receiving support, receiving funds, massive amounts of funds from some Arab countries, just because of their hostility to the Iranian regime, not knowing that MEK has no future in Iran. They have no grassroots in Iran. And exactly like you said, Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi has the biggest support. He is the established authority of the opposition against the Islamic regime. He's a Democrat. He's a liberal. He understands America. He's perfectly capable of presiding over the transition during which the Iranian opposition forces will be brought together to join forces during the process of overthrowing of this regime. However it happens, whether it happens through a massive attack by the US government, US military on the regime, or by mass uprising of the Iranian people, however it happens, which I think is going to happen very soon, then Prince Reza Pahlavi would be able to establish a government very similar to his father, as far as the foreign policy is concerned, friendly to the West, friendly to the whole world. Iran today not only can be a friend of the United States and Europe, for that matter, basically the entire Western world, a free Iran can solve a lot of economic problems, and I can mention a couple of them. If you can imagine what happened to Europe, Europeans, after the downfall of Soviet Union, they became a little too cozy with Putin and with Russian regime, and they started buying gas and oil, natural gas and oil from Russia, and Russia provided them with cheap gas and oil, just like any drug dealer does to its potential customers, getting them addicted to their narcotics, and eventually after they got addicted, they start jacking up the price. That's exactly what Putin did to Europeans, got them addicted to the cheap oil, and the entire industry in Germany became addicted and dependent on the cheap energy resources from Russia. And after Putin became assured that Europeans are so dependent on his cheap energy that regardless of what he does politically, they wouldn't be able to raise a finger against him, then he invaded Ukraine. And fortunately, Europeans really took a very strong stance against Putin, and they came together and started helping Ukraine. But as a result, Russians cut off oil and gas to Europe and to Germany in particular. And Germany is experiencing, since the beginning of the war and the cutoff of the Russian oil and gas, Germany is experiencing an existential economic crisis. Germany, which was the beating heart of European economy, is now at the verge of economic collapse because of the loss of its energy resource, and the replacements that they found for the cheap Russian gas and oil, they're buying it at 4 times the price that they used to pay the Russians, and that basically means manufacturing of anything in Germany unprofitable. So the fact that Europe is now confronting an existential crisis, Iran can come to rescue. Iran is the only country in the world that has at least 10 million barrels of oil and gas, untapped oil and gas, which is presently not presented to the international energy market. And if United States gets rid of the Iranian regime and Iran comes back to the fold of the American and the Western economy, then American companies, which are the best in the world for oil industry extraction and processing, within a very short time, they can bring 10 million barrels of oil to the global market, and they will solve this existential threat that Europe and Germany are confronting. This is just one of
area.
the side benefits of getting rid of this regime.
Let's talk about Prince Pahlavi's relationship to Israel. His family, I think since his father, and he continued that, taken a trip to Israel every year. So he already has a working relationship with the leadership of Israel. I saw the pictures earlier last year where I think the Prince Pahlavi's daughter married a Jewish gentleman. So obviously this is not some kind of radical Islamic family. They take a trip to Israel every year. They're friendly to Israel. I mean, that right in itself would be a major stabilizing factor in the Middle East, would it not?
Absolutely. I just gave you one of the benefits of a free Iran for Europeans. Another one is for Israel. Persians and Jews go back long before even 3,000 years ago, pre-Islamic and even pre-Christian era. And the friendship between the Persians and Jews are so well established that is even appeared in Torah, that Cyrus the Great, which saved the Jewish nation from the bondage in Babylon and set them free, and not only set them free, Cyrus the Great, the king of Persia, financed the reconstruction of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And for that, the Jewish people refer to Cyrus the Great, the king of Persia, as Messiah in their book. The only non-Jewish person who is really glorified in Torah is Cyrus the Great. So the friendship between the Persians and Jews, it goes long way. This Islamic regime, which has nothing to do with Iran and nothing to do with Iranian culture. Iran had a glorious culture 1,000 years before the Arabs invaded Iran and ransacked the Iranian empire. Not only Iranian empire, the Roman empire, the Egyptian empire, and then they ran their empire from India to Spain. And for 200 years, Iran was under the thumb of the Arab rulers. But the Iranians slowly came together and saved themselves one province at a time. And eventually, by the time of about 500 years ago, Iran was completely reestablished from the fragments of what was left after the invasion of Arabs. So there is no love lost between Iran and Islam. Today, because of the atrocities of the Islamic regime, Iran is one of the most secular countries on the face of the earth. Iranians have completely divorced Islam, not only political Islam, but Islam as a religion, particularly in the branch of Islam that's prevalent in Iran, the so-called Shiites. And all of that, along with the fact that, the kings of Iran, especially during the prince's father, the Shah Muhammad Reza Pahlavi, we had very strong ties with Israel. We were providing Israel with the line. There was a direct oil line and gas line between Iran and Israel. And something that, the Islamic regime cut it off after the establishment of the Islamic Republic. But all of that can be reestablished. I mean, I think the Israelis know it very well. During the time that I was in Iran, I left Iran in January of 1979. During the time I was in Iran, Israeli embassy was one of the biggest embassies in Tehran, was a common place for cultural activities, was very well known, very low security. I remember that there was in 1968, the Israeli football team came to Iran in the context of the Asian Games. And Israel at that time was a member of the Asian Football Federation. But the only country in Asia that will play with Israel, will agree with it, because it was Iran, because Iran actually recognized Israel politically as an independent country, but they couldn't play games in any other country. I went to that stadium in 1968 and watched the game, and it was a spectacular game, very peaceful game. And the same kind of relationship, and even better and stronger relationship now that the Jewish people realize, how they can help, the same way that Iranians helped the Jewish nation from total annihilation 3,000 years ago. I think Benjamin Netanyahu understands that it's time to return the favor and help Iranians who are really caught in the web of violence and brutality of this regime to rid themselves. And he did a heroic act in Iran in the 12-day war. Unfortunately, President Trump, for whatever reason, which is beyond my comprehension, stopped Netanyahu from finishing the job back in June of 2025.
President Trump, I think, said, I saved his life. I saved the supreme leader's life. And I'm thinking to myself, why would you do that? Why would you do that? And I don't want to be too critical of the president, but if he had let Israel finish it, do you think we would have 36,000 people dead right now? They just got murdered in the street. They'd still be alive, would they not?
Well, those people who convinced President Trump that Khamenei is a man of God, they had no idea what God is, and they had no idea who Khamenei is.
Are those same people going to convince him that MEK has a base on the ground in Israel? The people want MEK. Are that same group going to sell MEK to President Trump?
I hope not.
Me too.
Yeah, I hope not, but I don't think they will stop trying. I think they have very strong lobby in Washington D.C. and they're going to keep trying. But we have something going for us. The fact that during the demonstrations, of course, during these demonstrations of the last 3 weeks, the Iranian government has imposed a complete blackout, news blackout over the country, and very little news has come out. But now they just started, opening the internet gradually, and this little amount of flow of information that's coming out of Iran is bringing us amazingly sad and tragic stories. And the evidence for the fact that millions and millions of people in hundreds of cities were shouting Pahlavi's name in Iran. And I think the evidence will become overwhelming that no other political group has the legitimacy, at least as far as the Iranian people are concerned, to rule over Iran after this regime and rule over the transition period, however long it takes. I don't know when the planes start bombing the Khamenei's bunkers and the regime's bunkers, however long it takes, and whenever it starts, I think by the time it finishes, President Trump has never left a job unfinished. I think during the 12-day war, there were people who were, and I don't think they had a bad intention. They thought that Khamenei is a man of God. He is a grand Ayatollah. And in their eyes, a grand Ayatollah was equivalent of Pope. There is no comparison. There's no analogy between this bloodthirsty man and Pope, who is a man of God, who is adored by millions of people around the world. And this wrong equivalency between a grand Ayatollah and a bishop or a pope in Catholic Church was really the reason why he was eventually convinced not to kill a man of God. I think since then, in the last 3 weeks, he has been convinced that no man of God could commit such a heinous crime that they've done.
Indeed not. We want to get you back on because I also want to talk about your background. I understand you do a lot of study in the relation to neurology and politics. I've got a series I've done on brainwashing. I'm finishing up part 3. I have part 1 and part 2. I'm finishing up part 3 now to release. And I would love to have you back because I've spent 36 years studying brainwashing, and I've studied the POWs, American POWs that were put into the Chinese concentration camps during the Korean War. But fascinating study. Maybe just give me a little brief synopsis, a little taste, because you seem to have a connection between neurology and how people view politics and public policy. Is that right?
Physics, neurology, and politics. Yes. We have developed the technology. I mean, you know that in psychiatry is a disorder of the mind. Neurology is a disorder of the brain. And, in medicine, whatever body part you are an expert, a doctor of heart or brain or musculoskeletal or whatever, when something wrong, when you go to your doctor, the first thing that the doctor does, they order an MRI or some other kind of medical imaging. And the reason why they do that is because the particular organ in which they are an expert can be taken a picture of. But psychiatrists are experts in I don't want to call it an organ, in the mind, and we couldn't take a picture of the mind. We developed a technology to use MRI, a very special type of MRI images, and construct the human mind from it. And by comparing the mind constructed from the MRI of, let's say, patients with depression and normal patient with no history of depression, then we can identify with pinpoint accuracy exactly what part of the brain is not doing its job. And then through some computer navigation system, we can send magnetic pulses to those regions and stimulate those regions and treat these very dreadful diseases. Because of the fact that the technology is very new and very expensive and technologically intensive, most patients who come to us have already tried everything else, all kinds of medications for depression. Some of the patients have, been on medicine for decades. And eventually they come to us as a last resort when they don't find relief in medication and in traditional pharmacological treatment basis. And so the patients who come to us are the worst of the worst, the most difficult cases. And we've been able to use this technology to treat them in our clinic in New York. Our clinic is basically receiving patients from all over the world, from all 5 continents. And hopefully in one of your programs, I will get into more details and nitty-gritty of how the brain works, how the mind is an emergent property of the brain. So we have this relationship between the brain and the mind and the behavior. The mind is the emergent property of the brain, and behavior is the emergent property of the mind. And the way that these 3 entities, brain, mind, and behavior, are connected, forward and backward through a mechanism we call neuroplasticity is a fascinating new finding about the brain that, people who are suffering from these dreadful psychiatric disorders, by just understanding how brain, mind, behavior work, they would be able to, even if they don't have access to our technology, just the understanding of how the brain works would, first of all, will lessen their scare and their fear and the hopelessness that they're experiencing as a result of years and years of failure in various treatments that they have sought. And then, once they find out more about this technology, those who are good candidates and have the capability to come to New York, we gladly treat them with this technology. And we've been able to do that with a very high success rate.
Wow, that's fascinating. I definitely want to have you back. Dr. Arya Kangarlu. And folks, he is, again, part of this project right here, Phoenix Project of Iran, Empowering Iran's Future, the 100-day plan. A lot of people have said that the Prince Pahlavi, he doesn't have a plan. He's been gone so long. Oh, really? Well, here's a 100-day plan right here, guys. And it goes into a whole lot of stuff. You heard Dr. Arya go into just a little bit of it, but it's everything from related to currency, to jobs, to the Middle East and its relationship to Israel, America, oil exports, investment, and so much. So again, a lot of folks are out there saying things that are not true, and yet here's the Phoenix Plan, and we're going to have him back. Dr. Arya, thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you very much for applying.
And let me ask you this in closing. The spirits of Prince Pahlavi, I'm guessing you must communicate with him, visit with him. You're in the room with him at times. How are
Yes.
his spirits right now with all that's going on?
Very high. It's amazing that with the amount of pressure that he's under, how positive he is, how lively he is, and how energetic he is. And I think he, with the kind of characteristic that he has, with the kind of conviction he has, with the kind of love he has for Iran, I think he's the single most qualified person to take this load beyond the end point.
Excellent. Look forward to visiting with you more. Thank you for being so generous with your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Fascinating conversation there, folks. And thank you to Andy Cyrus for helping set that up. We'll be right back after this short break.